Happy 2019. Thanks as always for listening to the CBB Central podcast, our second edition of the week. And Brad, how's it going, my man? It's been a rough week so far for our favorite teams. Providence takes another Creighton at home, the game they needed. Northwestern gets the doors blown off it in basketball on a yesterday night against Michigan State. Siena loses it on the road to St. Peter's today. It's been a rough one, except for Northwestern football, which came away with the dub, and Pat Fitzgerald is staying. So I have one thing to hold on to, Brad. But other than our team stinking, how's the week been?
Horrible because our teams are stinking. I can't go to the NIT. I won't watch it from the NIT. I won't do it. I can't do it. I've been spoiled these past 5 years.
Yeah, I don't have that luxury as a Siena Northwestern fan. Like if Northwestern makes the NIT, I feel like it's not celebrated necessarily, but like I wouldn't complain if Northwestern's like a 2 or 3 seed in the NIT. I don't think that's necessarily where it's go. I don't think I didn't come away from the Michigan State game like super unimpressed by Northwestern. They didn't play well by any means, but like Michigan State's really good. I think every team should put on a Michigan State tape and learn how to push off of made baskets and push off of everything. I mean, there's so many teams that say, "Oh, we want to get out and run. We want to get out and run." Northwestern's a great example of it. Northwestern doesn't have a point guard, and their half-court offense is stagnant at times. And like they should watch Michigan State because Michigan State gets the ball and they just go. The bigs run down the floor, post up. And that's probably the toughest matchup for Northwestern all year because they can not only ward just one-on-one versus Pardon. I mean, that's a really fun matchup for people who love back-to-the-basket bigs. But then they can go with like a second post-up with Tillman or Goings as the second big. And if it's like Vic Law dealing with that or Miller Kopp, like Northwestern has no chance. So like that was a frustrating game to watch for Northwestern not to stay in it. But it's a game you were always expecting to lose, whereas, Providence at home against Creighton, that was a game they needed.
I mean, Creighton just hit shot after shot. I mean, Tyshawn Alexander banks in a three. Ballack hits like a double clutch step in three, and then Caleb Joseph hits a three, and it's like, all right, once the Caleb Joseph three goes in, you knew that was it. And I mean, Creighton was just better, and that's a shame because you could have really used this one. And while we call it a must win, it's not technically a must win. It's just the margin for error is just it's just closing in, right? Because you probably need 12 wins, whether it be 11-7 and a Big East tournament win. So this was a good opportunity to get one of those 12. The easiest path is to win your home games and then sweep the bottom. But now we have to steal one on the road to make up for it.
What did you think of Alexander? I know you said he had a big shot. I mean, I fell in love with this kid last year against Northwestern in like his third collegiate game. The kid was just like making shots with no abandon for no care really for anyone else on the floor. He was just like he had that like Marcus Foster instinct of like I'm just gonna go get mine, and so I really liked him. And then was pretty quiet throughout the season, but obviously has picked it up this year.
Yeah, last year they had him playing a lot of point guard. Him and Mintz were like kind of splitting that point guard position. Side note, Zagorowski is so much better than Mintz and should play a majority of those minutes. That's a conversation for later. But in terms of Alexander, he moves off the ball this year, gets some more autonomy, more shots without Foster and Thomas in there, and he's really good. He can finish at the rim, he can shoot the ball. He's so quick with the ball in his hand, super fast getting down the floor. I think the kind of the biggest difference maker in the Providence game, I think Ballack was probably a little more impactful. Zagorowski was really good. Krompel, I mean, just his ability as like a pick and roll finisher. That's his game. He was a third leading scorer last year, but he's not one to create offense. He's someone who is just a dynamic pick and roll finisher, can finish above the rim, and those things gave Providence a lot of problems.
Yeah, positive for Providence. Makai Ashton Langford continues to make things happen.
It's funny because he's hitting 3-pointers now, which is hilarious because it takes him 10 years to get a shot off. But hey, if he's going to play well, I'm all for having him in. I just don't want him to take any minutes from Malik White or he's not going to take minutes from Diallo, but like Jackson I think should be in there before him too. So as long as he's playing well, he can play.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're not a huge Mackay guy. I'm starting to be all the way off the Ryan Taylor bandwagon. Like I've tweeted a couple times my frustrations with him, but it's like every bye game he'll just hit like 5 threes, and you'll be like Ryan Taylor, he's great again. And then in these high major games, he just like runs around off screens the entire time, forces a couple of 18-footers that should never be taken, and then plays bad defense and loses his man for a dunk. And then it's like, all right, great, thanks Ryan. Northwestern doesn't have any depth to deal with that. So, I mean, all these grad transfers have been disappointing.
I know. That's my like biggest takeaway is next year I need to kind of scale back the grad transfer kind of appreciation, certainly, and then also a little bit on the transfer market. A lot of the top-rated guys have not been as good as advertised. I mean, some have been better, like Zylan Cheatham, for one, maybe even Quincy McKnight a little bit too. And then like Brandon Clark's been as good as advertised, maybe even a little better. Lawson's been awesome, but there are certainly guys like a Tevin Mack too who's been disappointing. So it's really more hit or miss than you'd think.
It feels like the guys who've been successful coming out of the transfer market have been guys who are going into established roles and oftentimes are changing their role a little bit. Where like if they were just guys who put up numbers at smaller schools, especially, they're not making the impact at the next level because they're just high level scorers that like the idea being like if you threw a Davion Mintz or like any rotation player into into Rice's system, for instance, they'd put up numbers like Connor Cashaw, and that's why Connor Cashaw doesn't play. I think that's the idea. And so like when you have a Zylan Cheatham who's like do everything on the floor, I think Quincy McKnight's the big difference of all those guys. It's like he was all just like a scorer, turned it over a ton, and then at like Seton Hall he's just a dog, competes on D, like so much better than I expected. But like for the most part, I think you're pretty much spot on that the transfer market. I don't know what it is, but I mean, especially if like St. John's just invested a year of scholarship in Mikey Dixon. He plays 10 games and diffs because he doesn't play in 2 Big East games. I mean, it starts to be a risk. I mean, is it better than getting a freshman who may not pan out? I don't know, but it's definitely something to debate.
I think it is. I'm doing like a deep dive into that, like the late stock riser, like being someone who doesn't get a high major offer until the turn of the calendar of their senior year versus like a mid-major role player transfer, versus a high major kind of guy who rides the bench, like maybe like a Chase Johnson this year, or I can't think of another one off the top of my head, but like guys like that who are maybe top 100, top 150 recruits don't get a lot of playing time and transfer. Most of the time, they can't find another high major home. I'm thinking that grabbing a guy like that is going to be better than grabbing a late stock riser freshman. And then in the case of a guy like Mikey Dixon, I think that's a risk that you just have to take. Most transfers don't transfer after 10 games, right? Most guys stick it out at least a year or two. So that's kind of an anomaly. And if St. John's had one injury, he would have been playing 30 minutes a game as a starter, no matter who have gotten injured, except maybe Marvin Clark. So it's really kind of a puzzling decision there.
Yeah, I don't really get it. I think guys should be going places where they know they're going to play. Like if you're if you're Mikey Dixon, why are you going somewhere where you're going to have to play an extra Shamory Pons? Like, was the assumption that Pons would leave early? I guess. If not, you knew your role when you signed up. And if you wanted to play 30 minutes a night, why didn't you stay at Quinnipiac? Or why didn't you go to an A10 school? I don't get it. There are a few mid-year transfers of note we should touch on this pod. A lot of them have kind of come forward in the last few days, few hours. I think the biggest name, Carter Gordon, from St. Louis, I might be mispronouncing his name, was the top 75 recruit. If you recall, Brad, there was kind of some buzz this last summer that maybe he was going to flip late to Mizzou. He didn't. He wound up St. Louis anyway. Was playing well, getting 20 plus minutes a game, averaging I think 9 and 4 with 2 blocks. He starts tweeting some cryptic messages about how St. Louis, it's been real, and then today he officially announces he's asked for his release. What are your thoughts there? Because that's a pretty big blow. I mean, in season to a title contending team in the A10. I don't really recall a scenario where a team who's a legit title contender is just losing a guy to a mid-year transfer. Usually, if that's the case, there's something wrong inside the team, and the team isn't winning.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very strange scenario because he was playing. I mean, he chose to go to the Atlantic 10 school, so the fact that they were probably going to win or come in second in the A10, not really much more you can ask for. They if they won the A10, they'd probably be in a position for an at-large, given that they won at Seton Hall and they have the home win over Butler. They would at least be in the discussion with like a 15-3 or 16-2 record. So the team was relevant. He was playing. I guess he was just unhappy. Haven't heard any potential landing spots yet. Should be a team that needs a center there. As a top 75 recruit, he'll get tons of looks. He could even, he'll certainly get high major looks. I saw that the Missouri beat writer didn't think that Missouri was going to be an option for him. I mean, Illinois really needs big men. Maybe that's something, but can't wait to see the list of schools for him, especially with these mid-year transfers. We talk about the transfer timeline is condensed compared to a normal four-year recruit. The mid-year transfer timeline is like infinitely condensed. I mean, you have like 2 weeks, if that, to either visit or be recruited and make your decision so you can be there by the spring semester. So it's a very quick timeline, and I'm sure we'll learn potential landing spots in a few days.
I think unless the NCAA changes the rule and lets guys play right away in November if they transfer mid-year, then you should not transfer mid-year and then play in December, in my book.
Absolutely
I think
never.
You just sit the whole year. Like that's what Mike Lewis is doing at Nevada. That's another mid-year transfer I wanted to mention on today's pod. Leaves Duquesne after playing, he was a star for them his first 2 years. This year takes a backseat to Sincere Carey, their point guard, and then they like Frankie Hughes from Mizzou came in and played a lot. They have Michael Weathers. They have a few other guys who can, or maybe Marcus Weathers, one of the Weathers twins. They have a few guys on the wing who started to eat into his minutes. He was only averaging like 6 a game. He's resurfacing in Nevada for 2020, so he's gonna, I believe, walk on this semester, then sit out all of next year, and then finish up in 2020. Which I don't know. I don't know if he's necessarily, Nevada builds for a national, like trying to be a nationally relevant team. If grabbing a guy who's averaging 6 a game at Duquesne makes a ton of sense on a sit one, play one deal. But Muss does his research on these guys. He knows what he's getting into. And Lewis can certainly score the ball. We'll see where it goes with that one.
They did the same thing, right, with Jalen Harris from Louisiana Tech. He only played a few games for Louisiana Tech last year. Sat that half year and then all this year.
Yes, indeed.
So
I don't think he actually enrolled until June. So that might be it. Like Nevada runs out of scholarships, and they just tell the guys don't enroll until June, and then we'll have a scholarship.
Yeah, so this is the thing. I saw Doug Gottlieb taking some heat, saying that if you transfer mid-year, you should have to pay back your scholarship, which would obviously never happen. That's a ridiculous suggestion. But why people were mad, saying, oh, like these kids, they deserve freedom like a coach could leave. Well, one, like a coach would never leave and go to a new team mid-year. At least I mean, that would be extremely rare. Number two, transferring mid-year doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit the player because you lose a year of eligibility without a waiver. And I mean, who knows? I mean, with the frequency that waivers are being given out, maybe this is a moot point. But according to the letter of the law, you lose a year of eligibility. So that does not benefit you in the slightest. It doesn't benefit the coach of the team that you are leaving because he's losing a player. It doesn't benefit the NCAA because presumably these are relevant players that you care enough about to have this opinion on, and they're taking themselves out of competition and losing a year of eligibility in the NCAA system. So if an action doesn't benefit any of the parties involved, should it even be allowed?
I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't be allowed to leave a team mid-season. I just don't know why you're enrolling so you can come back. I don't. It's definitely a weird case. I think you make a good point. Like, it doesn't really benefit anyone other than guys who are just super unhappy in their role. mean, that said, like if you're Mikey Dixon who just sat out last season, why are you, leaving midway through this year? Even if you wanted to just wait and leave again, I guess the argument would be you got to leave now because then you could at least be eligible next December for your junior year, and then and then you get a full senior year. Whereas if you waited again, then I guess you'd lose a year because you would go because you would sit next year, assuming you don't get a waiver, which Mikey Dixon probably wouldn't get because he's staying close. He's already local, so you can't do the hardship thing. So he would sit next year, which would be his junior year anyway, because that was his fourth year in college, and then he would have a senior year. So I guess I get it if you're Mikey Dixon, for instance, but it's just weird. I mean, like a lot of times I think these moves are a little too quick. Like Mikey Dixon spent a year plus at St. John's, and then all of a sudden decides he doesn't want to be there because he doesn't play in 2 games.
And especially next year, I mean, Pons is definitely going. So the point guard position is between the JUCO transfer Cam Mack and then Dixon. I would think. I mean, that's a very close call as to who would start. I mean, Dixon hasn't really played well this year. He's very wild with his decisions. So I could see him being put into a 6th man again, but at that point, you stick it out this year as the 6th man. Maybe you play 10 minutes a game, which you're unhappy with. Maybe next year as a redshirt junior, you play 15 minutes a game, and then you can grad transfer after that. So it seems this way you're sitting. It seems like he would rather sit somewhere than play 10 minutes a game.
Yeah. And I guess I understand. Like, let's say Mikey Dixon, I'm trying to think of like places that would make sense for him. Iona, St. Bonaventure, 2 schools that take transfers. They've taken up transfers and down transfers in the region. Let's just take those 2 as an example. Like, if you're at Iona, he'd be their starting point guard next year. So he could leave now, and so he loses his 10 minutes a game on the St. John's team. If he thinks I'm getting beat out by Cam Mack next year at St. John's, then I could be the starting point guard by December at Iona instead of losing a year. I don't think it's actually the worst logic.
Yeah, it's not bad. But then again, you could right, because you have a year and a half at Iona. You could do this year and a half at St. John's and then get that 2.5 year, right? That full redshirt senior season at Iona.
Yeah. No, it's tough. I think kids just hate not playing. I think that's what it comes down to. One other sit-out guy or mid-year guy I want to touch on, Chase Johnson. This is a guy you were writing about preseason, right, Brad?
Yeah, I thought he would fit this kind of mold next to Keith Stone where they could, semantically, one's the 4, one's the 5. But I thought, as a kind of an energy player and like a rebounding type, I thought he could carve out a role. But it seemed like they just gave his minutes to Keontae Johnson as a small ball 4, and he was on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I know he's visited, I think, Dayton and Pitt. Pitt was the first thought I had when he transferred because, he's from West Virginia, so, somewhat close to home. Pitt needs talent pretty badly. They're struggling to make headway with some of these high-level recruits they're trying out to get a top 100 recruit into their program who could play a position of need at that kind of 4 spot. I thought that made a lot of sense. Dayton would also make some sense. They're building the transfers a little bit.
Well, with Dayton, Obi Tobin is really turning a lot of heads at the 5, and I'm not sure how much 4 he would play. In terms of Pitt, I think Pitt would certainly be a good fit. They're still in the mix for some guys, as you mentioned, like Kofi Cockburn, who's a top 30 recruit, Kudus Wahab, who's a top 150, and then kind of a later stock riser, Darian Seaburn, who's a guard. So they have a couple of irons in the fire, but it's looking like they may have to get more creative with how they're acquiring talent. And I think Johnson would certainly been a good addition. Could play the 5 or the 4. So that makes the most sense. But checking out Dayton's roster for next year, it's so guard heavy that I just feel like they're going to have to play with 3 guards at all times, and a lot of times with 4 guards. And you already have Tobin at the 5 and Jordy Chimanga, the Nebraska transfer at the 5. So I think playing time could be a little tighter there, and so go to the ACC school with more playing time.
Yeah, no, I think Dayton's definitely building like a 4 out 1 in type thing. Policelli could be like a small ball. I guess he's kind of like a 3-4 combo. Who could be a guy they're building with? We'll see.
And
But
Mike Sell's back next year too.
yeah, the Dayton fans don't love Mike Sell. It's interesting. Anywho, I think that's all the mid-year transfers we have to talk about. Brad, did you have any others you wanted to mention? I don't think there's anyone super noteworthy otherwise.
There were a bunch more that I wanted to quickly run through. I mean, I know we're kind of taking a lot of time here, so I'll try to keep it brief here. Ian Steer to St. John's. This happened a little while ago, but he's someone who could be on the Mikey Dixon path because a few days later, St. John's adds Valdir Manuel, the JUCO transfer, formerly committed to Seton Hall and St. Joe's. He's like a kind of like a Michael Enzi type, like a rebounder, a little bit bigger than Enzi. So between him and Seti Kita at the 5, I mean, they have 3 5s for next year. We'll see how playing time works out there. Jordan Usher is leaving USC, averaged over 8 points a game. He'll be a nice kind of small ball 4 for a high major. Shamail Stevenson from Pitt to Nevada, or Nevada, excuse me. I don't know if he's going to sit the full year or play second semester or work for a waiver.
I think he's playing second semester.
Second semester, okay.
Yeah.
Micah Potter, who left Ohio State in the preseason, is going to Wisconsin, where he's probably going to be the starting center next year. Maybe Roivers starts at the 5 and he comes off the bench, but he's going to play. I don't know if he's first or second semester based on when he left. Probably the last notable one I'll touch on is Abu Kijab, who Oregon combo forward, sophomore. I thought he'd kind of emerge in like a bigger role this year as like a key reserve. He has not. He was great on the U18 team with RJ Barrett. Or I guess that was U19 maybe.
It was U19 Canada 2017 in Cairo. Yeah. I watched that team because Prince Oduro was on it, and I was really scouting some Siena talent.
Yeah, and I mean he should absolutely stay high major. Being a position of need, that like athletic combo forward, he should have no shortage of interest.
I saw SMU floated as a landing spot there. I know they take a lot of Canadian kids, so that would make sense. But yeah, I mean those are the big mid-year guys. I know Jeff Goodman published a list that's really useful. As a lot of them mid-major guys who are getting recruited by a lot of mid-major guys, a lot of mid-major teams. So check those out. You get a lot of little nuggets like guys like Najee Garvin from Charlotte, I mean, people like that are going to wind up at D1 that are pretty interesting to watch. Siena's still waiting on the waiver for Elijah Burns. I still think it's like a pretty interesting precedent case because you could see this happen more often. Guys transfer mid-year if they graduate in December. That's what Siena got with Elijah Burns. And there's an NCAA bylaw that says you can't play for 2 teams in the same season, but there's also the no year in residence for a grad transfer. So if the NCAA opens this door up, it could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I just don't know. I can't see them letting him play for 2 teams, but then would he get 2? He wouldn't get 2 full years of eligibility, so that half year would have been wasted, right?
Yeah. So the hope was like you could petition for the 6th. You could petition for another year, but that would be a 6th year anyway. So he has no shot of getting this year back, even though he played 4 games. So I think the question is, would the NCAA fully open it up and say you can play for 2 teams if you graduate, or would they give him like a one-time waiver based on like him coming close to home? So that'll be the interesting game because Elijah Burns from Troy, like 15 minutes from Siena. So they may open it up limitedly and just say like you can do it because it's a waiver, but it's not like we're letting everyone who does this type thing, if that makes sense. So we'll see. I'm hoping it happens. I'm not holding my breath. I'll put it that way.
All right, dude, you want to move in and talk about some of our most surprising and disappointed non-conference teams?
Yeah. Do you want to start with that, or do you want to start with some of the just games of note from the last few days? Do we want to touch on briefly?
Why don't we do the games from the past couple days briefly first?
All right, let's do it. St. John's over Marquette, big. I had tweeted during the Buffalo game, when Marquette shoots like this, they can make the Final Four. Then when I watched them play St. John's, I tweeted when Marquette shoots like this, they could be an NIT team. That was kind of my takeaway. Like St. John's played awesome. That was the best I've seen them play. Marquette played bad. And I mean, that's kind of the Big East this year. Like I don't think on every given night we're going to get that from St. John's and we're going to get that from Marquette. And we're going to have times where DePaul's beating Villanova in the second half. And we're going to have times when it's just a weird league this year, just top to bottom, 1 to 10.
Absolutely. I mean, from DePaul, leading by double figures. I think in every single game, maybe not their loss to Notre Dame, but I think every game they've had a double figure lead and blown it. The Big East is going to be crazy. And in terms of that Marquette St. John's game, Marquette's gotten some really great contributions from some of their auxiliary pieces this year, like a Theo John, and then obviously the great play from Marcus Howard and the Hausers. But it looked like this game, just kind of a mix of cold shooting and kind of sloppier play on Marquette's part, and then St. John's really came to play. Marvin Clark was awesome as that stretch five. Pons was on a mission. Heron had a great second half. Simon was good. I mean, just the whole starting lineup really carried St. John's. And if they can get, even 80% of that every game, they're probably going to win the league.
Yeah, I mean, that night they looked like kind of those Nevada. If you remember preseason, I mentioned, kind of comparing them with Marvin Clark at the 5 to Nevada last year, where Caroline was playing the 5 and they just spread it with shooters and versatile guys. And you kind of saw that again in that game, I thought, especially where Clark's hitting outside shots. They're just penetrating with a great point guard, and it's fun to watch when they're clicking.
Yeah, because Pons is certainly better than Lindsey Drew, but then Jordan Caroline is certainly better and a more versatile offensive piece than Marvin Clark, because he can put the ball on the floor, and he's really a matchup nightmare at that 5 spot.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Maryland, big home win over Nebraska. Bruno Fernando was terrific. Jalen Smith was terrific. I watched a fair amount of this game, and it was one of those games where I'm watching and I just didn't have a ton to take away. I was like, these teams are both fine. Like, I don't watch Nebraska and I'm ever floored by how good they are. I'm never floored by how bad they are. They're just a solid. They're pretty well coached. They have good players, not great. They're an NCAA tournament team. They're not an elite team. And Maryland found a way at home in a game they should win at home.
Yeah, I wasn't that impressed with either team, really. I think, being a road game, I guess I'm more impressed with Nebraska. But I thought Nebraska had that game, and Maryland just hit enough shots. Their front court was too much for Nebraska to handle. I mean, they went to Fernando and Smith a lot. Specifically Fernando, he was awesome in this game and just really separated themselves in terms of interior play. And they got enough timely shots and timely plays from Wiggins. I know Wiggins hit a big 3. Marcel played pretty well, and then obviously Anthony Cowan at the point guard spot. So that was enough to get the home win here. Still not enough for Maryland, and from a resume standpoint, they will have plenty of chances in the Big 12, and I'm sure that they'll end up with at least 8 wins, I'll say. But I'm still not totally convinced that this is a surefire tournament team.
Yeah, I'm not either, but they impressed me more than I thought I would be impressed, because I came in with the down on Maryland mindset. And that's a game they have to win at home. I think that's in the Big Ten, you're going to have to protect your home court, because the home teams win in college basketball. We saw that last night. I thought that was one of my bigger takeaways. Texas Tech going on the road to Morgantown, that was a grinder for a West Virginia team that we both saw in person and was not very good. I mean, that was an absolute grinder. And that's how every road game is in college basketball, especially in conference play. So if you're not playing Michigan or Michigan State or maybe Indiana that's fully healthy, or maybe Wisconsin, I think you have to win all your home games or you're going to be in trouble.
Absolutely. I mean, we see with Iowa right now, Iowa's already at 0-3. Northwestern's at 0-3. It's just, you have so many opportunities, but at some point, too many. There's a point where quantity of losses gets to be too many, where all right, 1 home loss to a good team is okay, 2 maybe is okay, but then it gets to a point where you just have too many losses.
Right. No, it was really funny though, because I was watching the Big Ten network feed for the Northwestern game last night, and they're like, Northwestern shouldn't start 0-3 in Big Ten play, because if they do, their teams don't make it out of 0-3 in Big Ten play. And it was Northwestern started with Indiana at Assembly Hall, Michigan State at Breslin, and home against undefeated Michigan. Gee, you could understand why they might be winless in conference play. Now, if they're still winless after playing Illinois at home and Iowa at home and Rutgers on the road, then you start to be in trouble. but like those are elite teams that they should probably struggle with if they're a bubble team.
Is that actually their next 3 games?
Their next 3 is at, home to Illinois, home to Iowa, and then they have a road trip to Michigan, and then they go road to Rutgers, home to Indiana, at Wisconsin, at Maryland. That's the month of January.
Yeah, so those
it's a grind.
Yeah, those next 2 have got to be
they win them
must wins. I mean,
they got to win them.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I mean, they certainly will be favored in both.
They certainly should be. I'm just worried Illinois is just going to like come out and go nuts. I don't know why. I just am. Texas Tech grinds it out over West Virginia. That was just a very poor game to watch. Derek Culver was in foul trouble. Derek Culver for West Virginia was very good. I was very impressed. Otherwise, that's just a road win that you need if you're Texas Tech, and that's a game where West Virginia could have really built back a lot of goodwill after a really bad knock-on.
Yeah, I just watched a couple minutes of that game. I was focused on the 6:30 tips. I watched a few minutes in the first half of that game, and it was just so painful. I mean, it was both teams that was a absolute rock fight. I mean, there was one play where like Texas Tech even got like a wide open layup. It was like Moretti drove baseline and dished it to Kyler Edwards, and he just blew the layup. And it was like, it's just going to be this type of night. But that Seton Hall Xavier game was super entertaining. Another blown game for Xavier. Seton Hall looks very good. I think borderline top 25 right now for Seton Hall. The pieces just seem to fit better than I would have thought coming into the season. And then Xavier's they're just an absolute tailspin. I thought Gooden and Marshall would really take that next step, but they're both. I guess that they both regressed so far. It's kind of tough to say, but I thought both would certainly be better than they were right now.
Yeah, they just can't finish a game, which is super frustrating. Seton Hall, I mean, I think it comes down to 2 things. Like we talked preseason, like if you're down on Seton Hall because you're down on McKnight and Thompson, if you're up on Seton Hall, you're high on both of those guys. If you're even on Seton Hall, you're high on one of them. If it turned out that McKnight was as good, if not better, than like the expectation, and they got they're getting outstanding play from Mamu, which is making it a lot easier to deal with not getting much from Torian Thompson. So I mean they're really good. I have them top 25.
Yeah, it's Enzi and Sandro have been kind of the big pluses, right? The reason why Seton Hall is playing above expectation is, I think, solely on the backs of Enzi and Sandro. And McKnight's been fine. Kale's probably been as good as expected. Powell's been better than expected, but I mean, he was a star. Like everyone who paid attention to a Seton Hall last year knew how good he was. But I mean, Thompson stinks. He's just horrible. There was a stretch in that game where he catches the ball in the wing. This is the first half, and he literally just jab steps for 15 seconds, like Zach Randolph style, just like turn and face in the high post, jab step, jab step, jab step. Gave it up. Next time down, contested 1 dribble pull up, way off. 2 possessions later, wild 3-pointer in transition and gets pulled. You just can't have that. You can't have your 7th best player giving up possessions like that. It just can't. You can't even have your best player, make plays like that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's been tough for them, no doubt. Speaking of teams, it's been tough for Kansas State. They get stomped at home by Texas. We're gonna talk more about Kansas State because I'm gonna have them as one of my disappointing teams. So I don't know if there's that much to say here other than they're not good.
No, I mean, especially with Dean Wade out. I mean, we kind of saw this in the NCAA tournament last year where they ended up making like the Elite Eight, but in that game against UMBC, the 9-16 matchup, that was the worst NCAA tournament game I've ever watched. I mean, both teams were just horrible. Kansas State just for some reason, they have a lot of really good players, but they just can't score, and that's exacerbated with Dean Wade out, and then Stokes was out too, who hasn't really found his groove since being injured last season. I mean, you have a great player in Barry Brown. You have an NBA prospect in Xavier Sneed. You have proven guys like Cartier Jara and McCole Mayween, but you just, I don't know, you just can't score on.
The whole reason we thought K-State would be better this year. Did we deep dive on them? I don't remember if we did, but we definitely talked about them a fair amount preseason. The whole thing was like they bring everybody back. If there's like slight improvement from just the core guys like Brown, Kamau Stokes, Dean Wade, Mayween maybe gets a little better. Austin Trice comes in, helps him on the glass as a JUCO. He's done nothing. Cartier Jara was like good last year at times. He's regressed, I think. I mean, he hasn't been very good at all. Mike McGurl, who had some bright spots in the tournament, has done nothing. They're not very deep. I mean, this is gonna kind of cover what my whole thing with K-State, but like they're a mess. They're what they were last year, maybe a little worse, and what they were last year is a 9 seed.
Yeah, because as a 9 seed, right, you're a top 36 team in the country. You bring everybody back, but we kind of saw this with Seton Hall last year, and now I think Seton Hall last year is much better than Kansas State is this year. But the same kind of principles when you just run it back and you don't make any additions, like of consequence, you usually don't make the jump that people think. Now with Seton Hall last year, you kind of reason with yourself, okay, Sanogo's healthy, or you kind of put too much stock into some of their incoming players, and then this year with Kansas State, you mentioned, they're adding Austin Trice. Oh, Stokes will be healthy. Dean Wade will be healthy the whole year. But it seems like those kind of factors were overrated. And I still think Kansas State can make the tournament, but they're certainly, I mean, most people had them top 12-ish. I think I had them at 17. They aren't going to sniff those lofty rankings.
Yeah. No, certainly not. And then final game I wanted to touch on, other than the Northwestern-Michigan State game, which we covered in the open, Kansas. They pretty much were in control against Oklahoma, led by double digits for much of the second half. Oklahoma's fine. I don't think they're an elite team. Kansas just clearly better at home. Udoka back makes a difference.
I think Oklahoma's probably a top 20 team, and Kansas is probably a top 8 team, and that's when the 20th team goes on the road to the 8th team, they should lose by 7 or 8. So it pretty much went as expected there. Yeah,
no, completely agree. Don't have much more on that. So if there's no more games you wanted to touch on, Brad, from the last couple of days, we can get into our 3 surprising and 3 disappointing teams from this season so far.
Actually, just one last game too. Butler Georgetown. Butler really blew an opportunity. Georgetown should be the bottom 3 in the Big East. They go on the road and knock off Butler. That's a bad loss for Butler, and in a league that's so congested, and Butler didn't have a great non-conference. They could have really used that win, but their kind of rotation is what puzzles me, because Fowler sucks. He's horrible, and he's been the starting center the whole year. Even though Brunk is limited to like a finisher, but he's certainly better, brings a lot more energy than Fowler. And then I just don't like Aaron Thompson. I don't like his game. I don't like that kind of point guard, especially on a team that has had stretches where they desperately need offense. And he's not going to provide you any offense. I mean, he can hit a shot this year, but he's not an offensive threat. And that was okay when you had Keelan Martin in the starting lineup, but now that he's gone, I think you really need to go with a more offensive focused lineup there.
I don't mind with him starting as like a ball mover type thing. Like, he's great on D as long as he's not making mistakes, and he's not. He has a 2-to-1 assist to turnover. He's not a complete ball stopper shooting the ball wise. Like, he doesn't destroy the spacing. I think you can play him as just kind of like dribble, drive, and kick type of guy. And just be semi useful. I think you need to be consistently rotating bodies though, and like if they have a pretty good number of scoring options. We can Baldwin, like Jurgensen, McDermott, Badley, and Jordan Tucker can all get a bucket. I mean, I would say just keep rotating bodies. They have all these guards. I'd like to see them go small more. Like Tucker at the 4. I know that was like the whole thing. Like Duke missed on Kevin Knox, so they wanted like a combo 3-4. Jordan Tucker was that guy. And obviously, he wasn't that guy for Duke, but I think you could use him more as like a small ball four and ignite the offense. But I'm way down on Butler.
And here's my thing with this lineup is that Baldwin has the ball in his hands most often anyway. He's the primary creator, and Jorgensen being the second scorer. When you play, so Baldwin has the ball in his hand, and he's this elite defender of opposing guards. I think just let him play point guard because Jorgensen is your kind of secondary creator. Thompson being the third creator also puts them in a situation defensively where Jorgensen's like the 6'2" small forward and has to guard opposing wings. Why not just go with Baldwin, Jorgensen, and then let's say Badley, who's a good defender, can knock down shots and has good size. I think that would give them like you wouldn't drop anything on offense, and then defensively that should be an improvement. I think not that Thompson's a bad defender; he's a very good defender, but just moving Jorgensen to a more apt sized defensive assignment. And then I had tweeted at 3-Man Weave today because in the preseason they had their kind of net rating to show that when Butler went 3 guards last year, that was their best lineup with, I believe, Keelan Martin at the 4. But this year, no matter which 2 they had in there, like Thompson, Baldwin, Jorgensen, they had the same net rating, which I think backs up my argument of let Thompson come off the bench and play that bigger lineup because you're not losing anything in terms of net rating, and it'll give you more size.
Yeah, completely agree. 3 surprising teams, 3 disappointing teams. That's the main beef of the pod today. We've gotten kind of into a bunch of the teams I wanted to touch on already, so that might speed things up. But Brad, why don't you start with a surprising team?
I think the most surprising team for me, I think it's going to be Creighton. I mean, I had them 9th in the Big East, but we talked on the improvement of Tyshawn Alexander and then kind of the emergence of some of their newcomers, specifically Zagorowski and Damian Jefferson, who've both been very good. So they have a clear go-to scorer in Alexander, a great secondary scorer in Ballack. They've beaten everyone that they have been supposed to and lost to all the teams that are better than them, which they kind of need to start punching up if they want to break into the top 25. But I think that this is a borderline top 25 team, despite me selling them last week. The game against Providence really changed my opinion on Creighton. I think that they're for real.
Yeah, Creighton was on my list as well, but I have plenty, so we can, I'll just find 3 more. Oklahoma was my number 1 though. To me, coming into the year, they were 9th in the Big 12 by everybody. We had major questions. How would they look at point guard with Miles Reynolds and Aaron Calixte? How would Christian James look? How would they look on defense after being terrible on that end last year? I mean, I would argue this is a better team than last year's team, and I think that's pretty incredible and speaks to what a good job Lon Kruger does.
Yeah, I had Oklahoma 10th in the preseason. They've certainly shot through that. They have a shot to finish 2nd in the Big 12, and then you mentioned the point guard is kind of the biggest difference between the expectation and the reality. They don't seem to miss Trae Young too much. It seems like maybe his impact wasn't as great as people thought, or maybe just all their auxiliary pieces, have improved enough and have gained some more cohesion.
Well, they run like a fundamentally different game. I mean, last year it was just Trae Young brings it up, spread, pick and roll. This year they run a lot more stuff. They let Manic involved in the high post. They get James on the wing isolated. They do a bunch of different stuff this year that they didn't run offensively because they didn't really need to, because the best way of using Trae Young, other than running him off ball screens constantly, was just have him run pick and roll. And I think everyone kind of figured out how to stop that because they weren't like an elite shooting team around Trae Young. And it's been really fascinating to watch. And I think people didn't really give Lon Kruger enough credit. I mean, he's just a really good coach who's found a way his entire career to be a winner. And I think maybe we undersold that preseason. But yeah, I mean, we talked early in the pod about how grad transfers have been disappointing. they found two guys, from one low major in Maine, Aaron Calixte, and one, mid major in Pacific, who you've just kind of fit together into a really nice kind of 1 and 2 guys who can score it, guys who can distribute. It's been a really nice fit.
Completely agree. For my second most surprising team, I'm going to go with Texas Tech, because there is a legitimate chance that Texas Tech finishes in the same spot that they did last year, being like a 3 seed. But I don't think anyone would argue that this year's Texas Tech team is better than last year's. I mean, you lose Keenan Evans, you lose Zaire Smith. I mean, half of their rotation were seniors, but the massive jump that Jared Culver is taking, and then one of the grad transfers that has worked out, actually 2 of them, being Mooney and Tarek Owens, and then they've also gotten some great improved play from their auxiliary pieces, and you have a team that's knocking on the door of the top 10, despite not having that look, in the slightest.
Yeah, no, it's been really impressive, and once again, talk about coaching and Chris Beard. Like they're fundamentally great on defense. Like they execute a game plan to a T. I think them and Michigan are the 2 teams I enjoy watching most on defense, because like Virginia runs a pack line. Like it's very clear what they do. They're very disciplined in what they do. But like Michigan and Texas Tech, I think, do the best in just like game planning a team and just executing it to a T. And that's super, super impressive to watch. A huge Texas Tech guy. I'll say Seton Hall as my next surprise team. We touched on them earlier. I was way down. I had them, I think, 9th in the Big East. For them to be a team that I'm ranking right now is pretty unbelievable to me. I mean, everything is broken right, though. I mean, we always talk about, best case and worst case scenarios. And they've pretty much been their best case, other than Torian Thompson being really good. Quincy McKnight has been, a high level player that we thought he potentially could be. Miles Kale has been very solid. They've got a legit star in Miles Powell. I don't know if we knew that he'd be a star. Enzi's filled the role nicely. They're getting usable minutes from guys like Romaro Gill, like Anthony Nelson, like Jared Roden. I don't know if we knew that preseason either. I've been very impressed with what Kevin Willard has done with his group.
Yeah, I had them 7th in the preseason. I thought that they were NIT bound. But I mean, we touched on it earlier. The jump that their big men have taken it have truly elevated Seton Hall. So I mean, I've seen people kind of pose the question, is Seton Hall the best team in the Big East? I'd say no, but I think that they're certainly borderline top 25, which this year in the Big East gives you a chance to win the conference.
Yeah, no, it's very impressive, and certainly part of that is the Big East. Like, the fact that they're in the discussion to possibly win the Big East is more so what the Big East has been versus what like Seton Hall has been expected to be. I mean, when was the last time you could win the Big East at, a fringe top 25 team? But that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, it's because, I mean, Marquette's right there, St. John's right there, Creighton's right there, Seton Hall's right there, Villanova's probably right. So you have 5 teams that it would not be crazy if you rank those 5 teams like 26 through 30. Like back to back, it's just that closely congested.
Yeah, no, completely agree with you. Do you have a third surprise team?
A couple of different teams. I want to go Missouri, but I don't think that they've quite been tested enough yet to show that they've survived truly without Jonte. So I'll go with Louisville. This is a team I thought was certainly going to be NIT bound. But they've built quite the resume so far, having beaten Michigan State at home, and they have the win at Seton Hall, which will certainly withstand. They can maybe even go like 8 and 10 in the ACC and still get a bid. So it looks pretty safe. Like Louisville will be dancing. Talk about overachieving with the pieces on your roster. One of the few good grad transfers, Kristen Cunningham has been awesome thus far. Then the UConn transfer Stephen Enoch, and then sophomore Jordan Nwora had a big breakout season as well.
Yeah, Enoch's been the key there. I think just because we had so many questions about what they do up front, and Enoch's been solid. And Cunningham, as you said, it's just been a big surprise. I was way down on him. Didn't think he'd do much. My third surprise team, like you, had a few names I had in mind. I was thinking about Arkansas. I was also thinking about Mizzou. I thought both of those teams are better than I thought they'd be, but they haven't really like proven it on paper, like in terms of the wins and losses enough for me to put them on this list. Like Arkansas is really just took a home win over Indiana. Like they lost to Western Kentucky. They played a close game against Texas State. They lost to Georgia Tech. Like they're better than I thought they'd be, no doubt. Like Isaiah Joe's really good. Gafford, Mason Jones, they're better than I thought for sure. But I don't think they quite break this list because I wanted to touch on a mid-major. Utah State. They're certainly not going to dance unless they win the Mountain West tournament. They're definitely a step below Nevada. We saw that last night. They got blown out. But I mean, for a program that the last 3 seasons when 17 and 17, 15 and 17, and 16 and 15, and fired their coach, weren't really even competitive in Mountain West play, a bottom tier team, to come out, be 10-4, have won over St. Mary's, to just look like a very well coached team on both ends of the floor. Both this is a high level offense and a very solid defense, has been very impressive. And Sam Merrill's going to be back one more year. Nemius Keita is only getting better. Brock Miller's been useful. They're going to get some new guys coming in next year who will be solid. Like, I am so impressed with Craig Smith as a coach, and did wonders at South Dakota. Made Matt Mooney a star. He's certainly doing the same type of thing at Utah State. Thought he deserved a mention.
Yeah, that's a good call because with the Mountain West, they could certainly finish second. I mean, Fresno State will be up there too, but if you're second, that's a good enough seed where you can avoid Nevada to the championship, and maybe they get picked off along the way. And right, because last year it was San Diego State in New Mexico in the Mountain West championship, right?
Yes, San Diego State and New Mexico, because Nevada lost to San Diego State.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe something like that could happen this year, and that's a way that the Mountain West could steal a bid.
Yes, indeed. One other surprise team I wanted to mention was Drake, mid-major, doing a really good job. We'll see how Nick Norton's knee tests out. They lost to Evansville yesterday. Nick Norton got hurt, but I mean they're 11-3 in with a third coach in 3 years. I think that speaks a lot to the job that Darian DeVries has done there. Some disappointing teams. I guess I'll start. I think the clear one for me is Oregon. Obviously, the Bol Bol stuff is gonna, be the bottom outer, and this thing could get off the rails, or they could figure it out. I mean, the Pac-12 is certainly not good enough where they're going to be crippled by this. I mean, Utah is giving the work to Arizona State at Arizona State right now. To give you some background, Brad, I don't know if you're checking the scores, but
no, but Utah is not good.
They're bad, but hopefully they become good enough for that to be a quadrant 2 win for Northwestern. So go Utes. Anywho, Oregon, I mean, I had them as I think number 10 preseason nationally, winning the Pac-12, and they're just not a good basketball team. Like, they scored 47 at Baylor. They lost to Houston. They lost to Texas Southern. Houston's a good loss. I'll give them the credit. They lost to Iowa. I mean, they won by 7 over Florida A&M. I mean, it's very disappointing. Obviously, Dayton Altman, great coach. Maybe not a great guy, but a great coach, certainly. Had a lot of talent. It just hasn't worked out.
Yeah, I had Oregon 24th in the preseason. I had them out of my top 25 until like the last couple weeks. I should have left them out. But shout out to the guy who was all over me for not ranking Washington or UCLA in my top 25 in the preseason, and then was criticizing me having Oregon 24th. So that was a big 0 for 3 for that guy. I mean, it's tough when you're clearly a shill for a conference, and that conference literally bottoms out worse than any power conference has ever had before.
Well, it's literally like that Kansas win's going to be nice for Arizona State, but if they're going to lose games to Utah and Princeton, like, yikes! Like, they may not have an at-large chance. Yeah, like, I think there was thought they could get to, like, maybe if Arizona State wins like 14 Pac-12 games, but like Arizona's like using the Utah at home is going to be a non-quadrant 1 or 2 loss, unless Utah somehow cracks the top 75, which I don't see. That's going to be like 2 bad losses on a resume in a row. Assuming that loss, that score is still holding. Let me just make sure before we overreact on the pod.
Yeah, because a Utah loss combined with a Princeton loss is certainly more negative value than the Kansas win at home is positive value. So they have completely erased that.
And yes, it is still happening. Utah's up by 9 with 40 seconds to play. So that's going to happen. And Arizona State is going to give up 54 points in the second half to 6-6 Utah.
That's literally the worst possible scenario for the Pac-12. Like maybe Washington State beating Arizona State would be worse, but I mean this is a doomsday scenario.
Well, I think we said we thought that the Pac-12's best chance was have a couple teams go 14-4 and maybe get a bid.
Yeah.
And of course, the best team in the league just got handled at home to Utah. Anywho, do you have a disappointing team? Because you could just do insert Pac-12 team here, but I don't want to do that. So
I think the only two Pac-12 teams that I would consider truly disappointing would be Oregon and USC. Because I mean UCLA, we were both down on them coming in. I had them in the 40s. You had them lower, I think. And
I had them bubble team. I think I was last team in.
Yeah, they could certainly still be that good of a team. They won't have that resume where if they're the 40th best team in the country, they won't get into the NCAA tournament. But I don't think that's super outlandish. I'm gonna go with a Atlantic 10 team that broke my heart, and that'd be George Mason. I mean, we had high expectations for them. Thought Jared Reuter would be, such a major impact player with what he would do when combined to this overall roster and kind of the synergies he would create. But they've been eliminated from at large since the first week of the season. I mean, it was this absolute disaster. Certainly overrated. But interesting thing I was thinking about at work today. Do you think if you played God and could handpick the outcome of every single Atlantic 10 matchup for every team, do you think that you could get them to have 3 bids?
I'm glad you were so dedicated to your work today, Brad, first of all. But if I played God, could I get 3 bids? I could get 2 at-larges, I think. And then a 3rd in the conference tournament. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd imagine.
So
I will say George Mason handled St. Joe's on the road tonight, won by 25. They're starting to turn things around a little bit where they'll be dangerous for the auto bid. Certainly a disappointment from where we thought they'd be. I think we both thought they'd be a top 75 team. They certainly aren't that. But I mean, they only lost to Kansas State by 1. They beat they had won 4 of 5 before that. And with the exception of those first 3 games, they really haven't been that bad. And even that first 3 games, they lost by 1 to Penn, who's 10-3, 10-4. Lost by 3 to American. That's a real bad one. And they lost on the road to a top 3 Sun Belt team. So, I mean, they're definitely worse than we thought, no doubt. But they could still, maybe win the A-10.
I mean, St. Joe's was another team on my short list. Probably not disappointing enough to kind of bring up in more detail. But the A-10 is certainly there for the taking, especially a top 3 spot next to, presumably, looks like St. Louis and VCU being the top 2.
Yeah, completely agree. I know I mentioned I wanted Kansas State as a disappointing team. I'll just give 2 more because I have a few. San Diego State, I think, is a pretty disappointing one for me. I left off New Mexico, even though they've been pretty bad as well, just because they had the Jaquan Lyle thing. We didn't really know how that would kind of work out. San Diego State got 30-pieced by Brown at home, then needed a furious rally to beat Cal State Northridge at home. And I do want to note, Brian Dutcher, everyone said he was bad until they went on this 8 or 10 game win streak that included the Mountain West tournament, and they nearly won an NCAA tournament game with all of Steve Fisher's players that had underachieved for 4 years. And everyone's Brian Dutcher, the GOAT, give him an extension. And they're bad again. And I kind of wonder if maybe Brian Dutcher isn't that good of a coach.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to bring up San Diego State next because they have a ton of talent. I mean, they have a first-round NBA prospect in Jalen McDaniels.
Yes, Jaden's coming next.
Is like the big prospect.
Yes.
And then I mean they have some really good players between veterans like Devin Watson and Hemsley. And then they have Matt Mitchell. I mean, this is just like a very talented team for the Mountain West. And while they could, I guess, still finish in second, they certainly have not been playing like it recently. I mean, Brown, I think, is better this year, maybe like a top 150 team, but certainly you can't be getting blown out by Brown.
Yeah, no, it's not good. So your team next?
My second most disappointing team, Western Kentucky. I thought they could have a kind of Nevada-esque record, right? And it kind of looked like it could happen when they beat West Virginia, but that win has completely depreciated in value. And then they followed it up losing to Indiana State and Missouri State. I think both on the road, but still, if they're going to achieve what their talent level suggests, those both have to be wins. And they just really haven't had a ton of cohesion, haven't really gotten it going. I still expect them to win Conference USA, but an at-large bid will not be on the table.
Yeah, it's disappointing. They've won all these big wins. They just haven't, won their bye games and won their, home and homes against mid-majors that they have to win against. And so it's disappointing for that team for sure. Next up, I mean, I could throw in a couple of mid-majors. I could do the Loyola thing, although Loyola just hammered Indiana State, so maybe they're back. I wanted to do Butler. I think there was a lot of hype about this team preseason. I'm just way down. We touched on them earlier in the pod. I just don't really love how this team plays. Their whole resume is just not very good to me. I don't think they're going to build nicely in the Big East. I think they're going to be like a 9-9 Big East team to go to the NIT, which I think would be a pretty big disappointment for a program that expects really big things.
Yeah, I had this team as my last team into the field in the preseason. After that Florida win, I thought maybe they could be a little better, but it's just a very uninspiring team. We've talked on this a couple of times, but they just have a lot of one-dimensional players, which kind of makes the kind of lineup building pretty difficult. Mentioned it earlier in the podcast. I think Aaron Thompson should take a back seat, and certainly Nate Fowler too. We'll see if they have any lineup changes going forward. I saw on Twitter that their fans weren't exactly thrilled with not changing the lineup after the 30-point drubbing by Florida. We'll see if they have anything going forward.
Yeah, no, that will be very interesting to see how much, if any, the lineup changes. You have one more disappointing team?
Yeah, I'll go with. We kind of touched on Xavier earlier, so I'll go with Syracuse, team that everyone had top 25 for the most part. I think except for you, Kevin. But
I jumped in late and threw them at 24, just like you with Oregon. It was a big mistake.
I think that they could maybe still get there. The thing with the ACC is the bottom is so bad, and Syracuse is going to drop at least 2 games to the bottom. They're going to lose to Wake, and they're going to lose to Boston College, and then they're going to have a couple big wins sprinkled in there too. Which
can't wait for them to beat Duke at the Dome. It's going to be hilarious.
Yeah, because with how the ACC is stacked up this year, it's like the opposite of the Big Ten, where the ACC's top is so good, where it doesn't matter if you lose to them. But the bottom is so bad that wins mean nothing. Where in the Big Ten, the middle, like the middle is so big, and the middle is at a level where you can beat those teams, and when you beat them, it'll be quality wins. Like when Syracuse beats Miami and Wake Forest and Georgia Tech and Boston College and Pittsburgh, in Notre Dame now, it just doesn't mean anything. So they're going to have a hard time building a resume, I think, unless they really pick off a Virginia Tech, Virginia, all these top tier teams that are currently ranked in the top 15.
Right, they'll get cracks at it, but it's it's so tiered. In the Big Ten, there's so many teams, as a Northwestern fan, there's so many teams that Northwestern will play that I think Northwestern belongs on the same court as, is very competitive with. They'll play a lot of Indiana's, Iowa's, et cetera, that they can beat, no doubt. And Syracuse will have a lot of games against Wake and BC that they have to win, and they'll have a lot of games against Virginia and Florida State that they need one or two, a couple of, but they're probably not going to get. So it'll be really interesting.
I think It's kind of similar to the SEC, except the SEC's bottom is a lot better than the ACC's. Like I'll take Georgia, Missouri, Vanderbilt. Maybe I think maybe even South Carolina is probably better than Wake Forest. I think
Everyone's
Texas
better than
A&M
Wake
is probably
Forest.
better than Georgia Tech.
Half the Big South is better than Wake Forest.
Yeah, so I think the SEC is probably the second best league this year behind the Big Ten.
I wouldn't fight you on that. Speaking of the SEC, my final disappointing team is South Carolina. I had pretty high hopes. I thought they were a clear NIT team. I thought they might be an NCAA tournament team if a couple things break right. And they are 5-7 with losses to Stony Brook, with losses to Wofford by 20 at home, with losses at Wyoming, who's like the 8th best team in the Mountain West. Not great, Bob.
No, I mean they're just so offensively challenged, and then Silva can't stay on the court. Kotsar takes a step back. Your point guard is Trey Campbell. I mean, and that's a grad transfer that no one thought was going to be good and hasn't been good. So that's not really one in the we overrated grad transfers column. That's you have a guy who couldn't get minutes at Georgetown as your starting point guard in the SEC.
Yeah, no. And Justin Minaya has been hurt, which hasn't helped. I was pretty big on him.
And then heavily reliant on a freshman in AJ Lawson,
who's been pretty good. I mean, he's been like he's kind of fit the recruiting ranking of like a fringe top 50 kid who can put up good numbers on a bad team, but it's not high efficiency. He's averaging 14, 5, and 3.5 on 39% shooting and 33% from three, and a negative assist to turnover. Well,
that's
a sub
right. One. Should we move on to picks for the next couple days?
Yeah, let's pick a few games before we wrap this bad boy up.
You want to each do 3 or 4?
Let's do 3. I don't need 4. Why don't I start by nominating Kentucky at Alabama? I'm very excited to watch this basketball game. Kentucky's been playing awesome. Alabama is a tough team to beat at home. They play good defense. I think this is a nice test for Kentucky coming off a couple of big wins. How do they handle success? We've seen how they've handled, adversity early this season. I think Alabama upsets Kentucky. I'm going to probably regret this, but I just have a gut feel here.
I'm going to stick with Kentucky here. Alabama is certainly the most athletic team that Kentucky's played since Duke, right? I mean, they're much more athletic than Seton Hall, much more athletic than Louisville as well.
North Carolina, maybe?
Yeah, North Carolina is probably the closest. I mean, Alabama's big men like Dante Hall is certainly more athletic than Luke May and Garrison Brooks and Sterling Manley. So it'll be interesting. Alabama certainly doesn't shoot it like UNC does, and certainly doesn't have the scorers. So this could be a rock fight, but I think Kentucky's going to pull away. I just really liked the progressions that Ashton Hagans and Reed Travis have made over the past few weeks. Specifically, Hagans, I've been really impressed with how he's played thus far. And then if Harrow's found his shot again, like he had against Louisville, and then PJ Washington has been playing great. So I think this Kentucky team is truly finding its stride and will settle into a top 8 spot in the rankings.
Very fair. Your pick.
My pick, I'm going to pick. I will go with Nebraska over Iowa. I think I'm going to double down on my Iowa hate here, I guess. But Nebraska on the road, I think after narrowly losing to Maryland, I think they can pull this one off against Iowa. Iowa's front court is probably better from a college perspective than Maryland's, but they don't have the athleticism and kind of brute physicality of Fernando and Smith. So I think that the Cornhuskers can pull off the win here.
This is tough. I don't really trust Nebraska at home. Or on the road, excuse me. I don't really trust Iowa at all. I think I'm going to pick Iowa here. I think they're going to, come out needing a big performance. Fred McCaffrey is an emotion coach. He's a guy who relies on, getting his guys up to play and being ready to go. I think after getting beat down today at Purdue after having some of these bad performances early in the last couple of weeks, I should say. They're going to be ready to play against Nebraska. And Nebraska, that's a game they need. So it'll be a really interesting game to watch.
Pick number 2 for you.
Yes, indeed. I'll go Florida State UVA. Probably the biggest game of the weekend, just on a name or in terms of a ranking basis. Virginia at home finds a. I don't really have much question in picking this win. Virginia just doesn't lose regular season games, and this might be the best Virginia team Tony Bennett's had. I'm not convinced they're not better than last year because, I mean, all they lost was
Devin Hall.
Devin Hall, I was blanking on his name, and Wilkins, but they have 3 high-level scorers now in Hunter and Guy and Jerome. Kihei Clark moving Jerome off the ball some is super awesome. And they're really good. I'm all in. Virginia by 10.
I think Virginia will win as well. I'm not sure if MJ Walker is back. He's missed, I think, the past 2 games with injury. But, I mean, Florida State, certainly one of the deepest teams in the country and a legitimate top 10 team, but I also think Virginia is going to win here. They have been significantly underrated thus far because of their tournament performance last year, but I think we could look up and they could be, 29-2 when it's all said and done.
Yeah, absolutely. Your pick, game number 2.
Second pick, I am going to double down on my Ohio State sell and pick Michigan State to go on the road and beat Ohio State. They obviously just beat Northwestern pretty handily at home, and I think Ohio State's going to come back to earth. They've ascended way too high up in the rankings, and I think this is the start of their decline right here.
I would have picked Ohio State until yesterday when I watched just an absolute unit of a team come through Northwestern, and not only do that, but do that without Josh Langford. I just think they're really well coached. They're really good on defense, much better than I expected. I mean, that might be my biggest surprise of the year. It's just Michigan State's defense, and they're just awesome on offense. They make shots. They have bigs who can do everything. And Chris Holtman's a great coach and a wizard, but give me Michigan State here.
Number 3 for you.
Pick. Oof, this is tough. Let's do Indiana, Michigan. Get the 3rd Big Ten game in there. It's a Big Ten basketball podcast now, Brad, officially. Michigan is tough at home. Indiana might still be without Finney. I think it's a pretty solid pick here for Michigan to win this game and stay undefeated.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, Michigan's got to slip up eventually. They're also not as good as their ranking suggests. I think that they're going to settle in more to like the 8 to 12 range. I mean, some people have them at number 1. Most people have them top 3 or 4. I think that they've gotten some great play from Teskey and Brezdikas, but I think just overall their talent level isn't as high as some of the other top tier teams. But they're certainly better than Indiana, and at home I think Michigan gets this win.
Yeah, good call there, and your final pick.
So I wanted to mention first, this kind of flew under the radar, but UConn lost to South Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Yesterday. That was
so bad.
That was not good. UConn got all pumped up over a win against Syracuse without Frank Howard, and now they've been exposed as well. Looks like the AAC will be 3 bids at max, I guess. Maybe a 4th bid in like Temple, but probably 2 or 3 in that conference. But I'm going to pick this game. Iowa State pulling off the upset at home over Kansas.
I'll pick that too. In Ames, yeah, Tilton Magic, baby. Let's do it. And as for the South Florida thing, I want to say this. South Florida, Brian Gregory, has done a better job than we gave credit. Like I was very down on that hire, and then I kind of got confirmation bias from a bad year and then no like big name recruits. David Collins is still really good. Sophomore's taking the next step. They have a good point guard in LaQuincy Rideau. Alexis Yetna is averaging a double-double as a freshman. They still got to add some pieces every year, but they have a core now, and that is all you can ask for if you're trying to build a program.
They had the 2nd or 3rd worst non-conference schedule So this gaudy record is a bit smoke and mirrors, but they're certainly better than they were last year. I think they're definitely better than Tulane and East Carolina. Who's the other bad team down there? There's
not
like the
really.
clear bottom four,
Wichita
right?
State, really? No, it's really just the three.
Oh, okay.
I think. Yeah, SMU.
Yeah, because
good.
Tulsa was 9 in the preseason, and I don't think that they're better than Tulsa. So maybe they finish in 10th, but they'll be a better 10th.
Maybe they get to like 16 and 16, get to play in the CBI, play at a couple extra games. Who knows?
Look at that. I mean, this is what the CBI is for. Teams like that are rebuilding and just want to play in some postseason.
And hey, if you don't listen to this podcast in order to get your South Florida basketball takes, I don't know why you listen. Thanks for listening, everybody. We always appreciate it. Happy New Year. We'll be back some point pretty soon to talk more college basketball with you. But until then, have a great night.